greetings, and welcome to another episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. I'm your host, Scott, and with me, as always, is my colossal co-host, Caleb. I meant it in the best way possible.
That might be the most accurate one you've done. I'm colossal sideways, not colossal up and down.
No, talent, your talent.
Oh, yeah.
Your musical knowledge.
Yeah.
Your vinyl collection. Your comic book history. No.
My comic collection is actually, it's funny because I'm way more into the music, but my comic collection is actually broader than my than my vinyl collection. Not broader than my music collection. Anyway.
Stop bragging.
Yeah, I'll shut up now.
Anyway.
These are the worst things to brag about, by the way.
We're back again to talk about the experience growing up as youth group kids in the 90s and how that has shaped our adult lives. We'll talk to old friends about their faith journeys spanning from the 90s to today and discuss current cultural topics through the lens of someone who grew up during that era. Caleb, tell us who is on the pod today.
Yeah, we have another one of my internet friends. His name is Chris, and Chris and I just talk music. Again, this is like rinse and repeat on some of these intros because it's like, how did he get to know this person? We were talking music on Twitter, but that's what it is. Chris is a super into the 90s Christian music, and so that's where me and him we'd talk music, and so yeah, he got to know him, and I think he's kind of checked out the show a little and was interested in being on the show. So we had been actually trying to get together with him for a while and just had never been able to quite make it work. So I was glad to sit down and talk with him.
Yes, Chris, thank you for your flexibility. I know there was like twice when it was like, I don't know, like a Sunday afternoon. They're like, hey, we texted you. We're like, hey, do you want to record in like 5 minutes? You're like, what are you talking about? But we did make it work eventually, obviously.
Yep. Yeah, so it's good to have Chris on the show. And, I think it was another good example of, we've gotten into this a little bit, but that idea of the different cultures kind of can have an impact on your youth group experience, because he was raised more in the Bible Belt than us. And so, it was just another good example of that. And again, there's still enough similarities where it still was definitely youth group in the 90s.
Sure.
But it's continues to be pretty interesting to kind of hear those similarities and differences as we talk to people.
I enjoyed connecting with the similarities he had gone through and his experience. I know that he stayed around after youth group in a different capacity, and even into his adulthood had an interesting experience with youth group, which we'll kind of leave as a little teaser for the episode. But, still when he was talking about his youth group experience as a youth, I was like, oh yeah, that, yes, that too,
yep.
Yes, yep, that. But also in the same way, like his didn't need to be as zany as ours.
Yeah, they had a little bit more of even just that Southern culture of like cultural Christian and just what it meant. I mean, just even his high school experience around it, just very, different than ours. So again, just I think it adds to the tapestry that is that 90s Christian culture. I don't know if that's the right word, but it just kind of adds to it. So I continue to really, really enjoy hearing how similar and how different it was. I mean, it's just such a unique but not unique is the thing I keep on coming back to.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Chris, thank you very much for joining us. I really enjoyed our conversation. I think everyone's going to enjoy this episode. Listeners, thank you for listening, and we hope that you enjoy.
I want to break in and quickly remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed on this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s may not be held by or even approved of by everyone appearing on this episode. One of the goals of this show is to give everyone a safe space to share their opinions and thoughts on deeply personal matters of faith. We are not looking to start an argument, but instead we want to let people share how they feel. During our interviews and discussions, we may not represent every point of view on a given subject, and we understand that this may be frustrating at times, but it is the nature of a podcast discussion with a limited amount of time. We also know and want to acknowledge that our memories of events that happened 25 to 30 years ago may not be 100% accurate. We assume everyone's best intentions as they share how they remember the experience of their youth. Now, back to the show.
Okay, we are joined here tonight with our new friend Chris. Chris, thanks for reaching out and agreeing to come on the show here and talk to us about your journey. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good. Got the kids in bed. My wife is making dinner, so I'm living the good life tonight.
Living the dream. Good,
Well, you
good.
put your kids to bed before you guys have dinner? Did they not get dinner?
Listen, my kids are so picky; they eat their own meals, and I'm just happy to get any kind of food down them. But yes, they typically eat, and then we will eat later.
Oh, wow.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
We're at the teenage phase, so nobody eats at the same time.
Yeah.
Like 2 of our kids ate somewhere else tonight, and then like one of our kids ate earlier, and then one of them ate later, and so like it's whenever you can get something, it's your time to eat, and then off to your next thing.
I've got one kid who he will only eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and Lunchables, and
Okay.
so one is lunch and one is dinner.
Mm.
And so yeah, we're in that phase right now, so that's fun for us.
Oof.
Got it.
Well, as I've been told, that those things change over time. So hopefully, hopefully they'll like something else soon. But no, great. Well, I'm sure you're ready for some food yourself, and appreciate just the time that you're going to spend with us telling your story because that's
Yeah.
what we're going for, people's stories and journeys. So start from the beginning, like where, when, how, why were you involved with the youth group in the 90s?
Yeah. So I started attending youth group in the 8th grade. So when I was in the 7th grade, my parents started a church. I grew up in the Memphis area, just south of Memphis in Mississippi, in South Haven, Mississippi, the Bible Belt for sure. We had moved from Illinois when I was 11. And so I started the 6th grade in Illinois. So back then, I'm sorry, in Mississippi. Back then, of course, youth group didn't start in the 6th grade in the South. It started in the 7th grade because 6th graders were still in elementary school. And so then in the 7th grade, my parents planted a church. It didn't really go anywhere. So I was the only, youth group besides my sister, in the church. And so we didn't really have youth group. So we started going to a non-denominational church called New Covenant Church there in South Haven when I was in the 8th grade. We weren't really involved there. My parents weren't really, really happy there. The youth group was kind of weird, kind of cliquey. So my sister and I didn't really fit in. Then when I was in the 9th grade, they found a church called Oak Forest Church of God, which has really shaped me quite a bit as an individual. But I was there 9th through 11th grade. And then my dad took a minister of music church at another church in Memphis area called Abundant Harvest Church of God. And so I was there for my senior year in that youth group. And so then after that kind of ended, I went back to Oak Forest while I was in college and kind of became, a loser who still hung out with the youth group, in college. But yeah, that was it. So the big kind of portion of my youth group of who I say I was as a youth kid growing up was in that Oak Forest Church of God from 9th through 11th grade. Even though I had a great time at the other church when I was a senior, Oak Forest was kind of my home church that I still considered. And those kids in that youth group, I still call on to this day, some of them. So very, very influential to me as a teenager in Mississippi.
Sure. So clearly, growing up in a Christian home, music minister, church planters, that sort of thing. We already established before this. You and I are like went to youth group at the same years, basically. Is your sister much older, much younger? Were you guys doing that together?
Yeah, kind of. My sister's 18 months older than me.
Mhm.
So we were very close growing up. And so, yeah, she was a part of that youth group at Oak Forest as well. And then she was a youth worker at Abundant Harvest when we were there for my senior year. So, yeah, she was very much a part of that as well.
Okay. So you're kind of doing the same thing at the same time.
Yeah. I have 3 older siblings as well from them, but
Oh,
they weren't really a part of that era of my life, so to speak.
sure. So yeah, it sounds like really established in your life early on, as early as possibly could be, I suppose.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
what would you say your faith was like? Like, what words or adjectives would you use to describe your faith in high school during that time?
Yeah, so I probably would say like hardcore Christian, I was pretty like, so my home wasn't fundamental in terms of like a lot of people think of fundamental Christianity. There were certain things, certain aspects that my parents really drove into us. Church of God is very similar to the Assemblies of God. That's what I was raised as a kid and kind of what I transitioned to as an adult later. But they're very similar denominations. And so they can be very, but Church of God is a little more traditional in a sense. And so but really the only thing my parents really kind of drilled down in was like, no cussing, no drinking, no drugs. And then music. My dad was hardcore about, you don't listen to secular music. We only listen to Christian music, in our home. And so that was so when I say I was a hardcore Christian, like my friends in high school, they drank, they smoked marijuana, they cussed. I didn't do any of that. It was drilled into me. They knew me as the Christian kid, but I was still pretty fundamental on those kind of, I didn't cuss, I didn't drink, I didn't, smoke weed. I only listen to Christian music, that 90s era Christian music, that's why it's so important to me, and so that's, hardcore Christian, is the best way I would describe it. But like my closest friends were not my high school friends. Like the two didn't really mingle. The youth group friends and the high school friends didn't really mingle. I had my pastor's son went to the same high school I did. And we kind of friends, but we weren't we didn't hang out at school, but like at church, we were the best of friends, and I ended up rooming with him and another guy in college, and so they were my closest friends. It's like the two never mingled, they were two separate worlds, those friends, from that youth group, they were some of the friends I still keep up with to this day, so, that church in particular, Oak Forest, was very, pivotal in my spiritual growth. And it just hardcore Christian is the only way I can describe it,
Sure. I don't think, Caleb, anyone's used that word yet to describe themselves hardcore.
No, I'm checking the logs right now. We've heard extreme, but hardcore that's our first entry as the hardcore Christian.
Yep, I like it.
Yeah.
I was just saying, maybe it's a Mississippi thing. I don't know.
Well, as soon as you said it, I knew what you meant.
Yeah.
Behaviorally, we're doing different things, and I was going to ask, did those groups mingle? But you answered that question, already. You've probably heard Caleb and I say, our friend group and youth group was our high school friend group. So, maybe it was a little safer, or maybe we had a little bit of an easier time that way because we weren't sitting there having to convince a friend that we may like very much, but who had different behaviors than us. Hey, this band is good, or hey, you shouldn't do that. That was never really part of our high school experience, really.
Yeah.
Well, another thing you have to realize about Mississippi or Memphis is that everybody went to church. Everybody was a Christian, quotes Christian, right? So it wasn't that far off the beaten path for you to say you go to church and that you're a Christian, because the guy next to you who's drinking at the parties every weekend also goes to church and is a Christian, quotes Christian. You know what I'm saying? Because they've been raised in church. That's just what they believe. And they are a Christian in terms of their belief structure, but whether they have that relationship with Christ or not, I'd say the fruits weren't there, so to speak.
Sure.
So it really wasn't a big deal, to say I was a Christian in high school, because everybody is a Christian, in Memphis, or in South Haven, Mississippi. It's just the way the South works, so to speak.
You would have been the outsider if you weren't a Christian.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So for somebody in my high school to say that they were an atheist or they were gay or something like that, that was the air went out of the room, because that's just completely, oppositional or opposed to what everybody else has been raised to believe and be a part of, at least in the 90s.
And when you say hardcore in that context, then that makes me think the baseline for these things is a little bit different than maybe Caleb and I's baseline, or other people who, we talked to a few people who grew up out west and those sorts of things. There was a mix of people in our high school and our youth years who didn't have a belief system, or they would say someone's a hardcore Christian in maybe a pejorative way because they had already come to the table assuming that was bad or lame, or they weren't going to choose that for themselves. Whereas if everyone else is oh, this is very normal, the Christian part of it isn't a challenge. It's the behavioral aspects, or what you have
Yeah.
said, like the fruit is what's really kind of, setting people apart.
Right, exactly. So when I say hardcore Christian, it means basically the guy that's actually kind of living it out a little bit, you know. And I'm not saying I was perfect by any means, because I was not.
Hmm.
I was as hypocritical as they come, you know, as teenagers are. You know, but in terms of like trying to make a difference in my
Sure.
own life, you know, trying to live it out as best I could. That's kind of more what I mean, because everybody went to church, everybody was a Christian. So for me to say I was a hardcore Christian means that I was actually somewhat trying to take that faith seriously when I was a teenager.
Sure. Sure. Fair enough.
So you didn't work with somebody at like your local McDonald's who would play Cannibal Corpse because
Yeah.
he thought it would really bug the Christian kid he was working with. That was my experience. Is like he was
Antagonizing
an
you.
atheist, and so he's like, oh, "We're gonna listen to this satanic band just because it'll bug you, Caleb." And I was like, "I mean, it bugs me just because it's not good. Like I don't, the lyrics don't bug me, but the fact that this is crappy music, that's what bugs me."
Now, I did have a very good friend. She was one of my best friends in high school. We did not go to church together, but we hung out in high school. She was another hardcore Christian, and she had a guy in one of our music theory classes pay her to cuss. So that was an experience.
My gosh.
He said,
That's
I got
awesome.
$5 if you like just string them all out in one sentence, and she did it, and she got $5. So
$5.
Awesome.
$5 in the '90s, man.
Yeah, for real. That was
That
legit.
was a lot of money, you know.
Yeah.
It was
So,
two value meals.
yeah, yeah. So I didn't do that, but my friend did. Not calling
Mhm.
you out, Megan, or anything, but
Come on the show and
Yeah.
defend yourself.
Yeah, Megan's listening for sure. Oh, thank you. That's very good. I find that the difference in that experience just interesting, because we have talked to some people. We talked on our music series with Eric and Josh, and they grew up in the South too, and it kind of felt the same way. Like we've said a couple of times, their youth group didn't sound as desperate because everyone was just doing it, right? They didn't
yeah,
need to be super insane and crazy about it because everybody was just there. But you still had similar, I'm going to use this word not negatively. You just had a similar separation of groups, people, behaviors that you otherwise would get in places where they had more non-Christians and Christians interact at the same time. So,
yeah, yeah. Like so it wasn't a big deal for me to say that that I listened to Audio Adrenaline or Jars of Clay, because 75% of the kids were also listening to it.
sure.
Yeah, of course, they were listening to Green Day and all this other stuff too. But I wasn't, because I was hardcore. But it wasn't a big deal. Like I wasn't ashamed to say that I liked Christian music back in the '90s,
Yeah.
because everybody was listening to all of it. Like Jars of Clay, everybody listened to Jars of Clay. Everybody listened to DC Talk.
Sure.
So it's very different. Like you guys probably had very different listening, patterns with your friends than I did, for sure.
Hmm.
From that were in high school and that kind of stuff, that weren't in your youth group.
Yeah, I mean, it was all, whatever the pop on the radio was kind of thing,
Right.
the
Yeah.
secular station that we were rebelling against really, that's what we were doing. But we would, that's what everyone else was listening to. So,
Like I remember, like one of my best friends in the whole wide world. His name's Andrew. We roomed together in college. I still see him once a year when I visit Memphis, and we still have dinner together. And he married one of the girls in the youth group, and they've got kids, all this kind of stuff. And like I remember being so upset with him and so like judgmental of him because he did not listen to Christian music. So like and so it was like, how do how are you a Christian? You're not listening to this stuff.
Yeah.
So but he was also one I would probably consider a hardcore Christian too. It was just, different values, I guess. That wasn't driven into him as it was, as it was at my house. But,
sure.
I just remember being so offended that we would drive to the movies and he was listening to, whatever the secular station, pop station was.
Sure.
Come on the show, Andrew. Defend yourself.
Yeah, we got two more guests. Two more guests. This is great. Just keep naming people. It's
Right.
they're,
Okay. Yeah.
they're in the universe. It'll
our
come
new
back
strategy.
to you, right? That's
Sure.
right. Well, how about going back to youth group itself? Like, what are some of your most vivid memories? What are things that still stay with you, whether it was good times or teachings that you had with youth pastor, that sort of thing?
Yeah. I mean, I had two three different youth pastors. So two in Oak Forest, and then one at Abundant Harvest. And one in particular really sticks out. His name was David Petty, and he was just like you really got the sense that he cared about you. He the kind that would come and eat lunch with you at school. Embarrass you because he brought McDonald's into the cafeteria, and you have to sit there with all your secular friends, that kind of thing. Well, he brought you food, but I mean, he just really, I just felt like he cared about me, and so he had a real profound impact on me. He and his wife Dana, and then while I was in college, Dana got brain cancer and she passed away, and that really like broke my heart, because they had a small a baby, like a 3 or 4 year old kid, and he just really impacted me. We went on a couple local mission trips, so like we took a trip to New Jersey to help a church out up there, and then we took a trip up to Cincinnati, that kind of thing, which is one of my big vivid memories was because it was '96 and it was the Summer Olympics that were taking place in Atlanta, but we were in Cincinnati, and so we were doing host homes, right? I don't know if this has been brought up by other people or not, but host homes is where you you do a youth trip or something, and you stay with people in the church that you're visiting, as opposed to staying in a hotel, right? And so me and 3 other guys, we stayed with this family at this church who they had literally just visited the week before, and they offered to house 4 guys. Like today, this is be unheard of, right? You would never let visitors from your church that from the first Sunday house 4 teenagers from a visiting church out of state. It was unheard of. And so, but like even we were a little freaked out by it. Like, at breakfast when she told us this, we were like, "Are you kidding me right now? Like, why are we in this stranger's home?" But that's one of the things that I really remember was that they just put so much. They had so much trust, I guess, in these people, and it was just crazy to me. But I remember we were sitting watching the Olympics in the evening at these people's home, and I mean it was probably a 12-inch TV, and like these 4 smelly teenage dudes are all sitting around, barely can see the TV, and like we're huddled around. Carrie Strug goes, and she does this thing off the pommel horse, and she lands it, and she's got a broken ankle, and like they're upstairs sleeping. And like we're like downstairs, like silently cheering, like trying to be quiet, and like they sealed the deal. America won the gold, and like that's just a vivid memory. I will always remember Carrie Strug landing. That whatever it was that she did off the pommel horse, and then us having to be like super super quiet, and trying to contain our excitement, and like I will always remember those Olympics just because of who I was with. Where I was, the experience of it all, I remember they served us grapefruit juice for breakfast, and like none of us had grapefruit juice, and we just sit down and we pour our drinks. We think it's orange juice, and like the first person to try it would just watch the next person as they tried it. Like it's just like this joke between all of us as we had taken the drink and like realized they're in for it. They're gonna get to really taste this grapefruit juice, because you don't throw that at like a 16-year-old kid, you got to prep them for what that taste is, and then another trip we went to New Jersey, and it was the next year. And so it was some church we were helping in New Jersey. And of course we got to go to New York, the next day and spend all day in New York. So that was of course, huge to me. I remember walking around New York City with my friends. I'm taking all these pictures of this beautiful building, the Empire State Building. I'm taking all these pictures, and then I realized when we walk up to the building, it was the Chrysler Building. So I have like 12 pictures of the Chrysler Building that I thought was the Empire State Building. But on that trip, I was actually, I had a bathroom incident. That's all we will talk about in terms of what it was. But I had a bathroom incident, and I mean, those guys in that youth group and that youth pastor, David Petty, I mean, they were the coolest about it. Like, I mean, they were truly brothers to me, of course, I'm not going to go into detail about what the bathroom incident was, but so much so that like they have never told their spouses, that my buddy Chris did this, blah, 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 and like we'll talk about it and joke about it, but they are like, that was, that goes down with us. What happened in New Jersey stays in New Jersey,
Sure.
And so like that, it's very profound to me that they would have my back at the age of 17. Like that we were that close, we had that big of a bond that, that they stuck through that kind of secret, so to speak. I'm 40, almost 45 now. Who cares, right? Who cares what happened when I was 17, right? But then like it was a big deal, like I had gone on a trip, a high school trip with, like, for the high school friends for my theater stuff, and it had kind of come up about somebody like making a joke about, oh, somebody's going to have a similar bathroom incident, and like my buddy Matt just kept his mouth shut. Like he just looked at me and we kind of giggled and laughed, but he had every right in the world to be a jerk and be like, ha ha ha, Chris did this, but he didn't, and I think that's one of the reasons why I respect those guys so much, and I always try to seek them out if I can, anytime I can. So, that's in terms of like socialization things, but like
Sure.
My mom did kind of fill in a little while as we were in between youth pastors, and she did a series on absolute truth that really stuck with me in terms of what truth is and what it looks like in society. And that wasn't even a youth pastor; that was just my mom teaching us, and that really stuck with me in terms of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I can't really think of anything. Youth group in the '90s, it was, who knows what they were throwing stuff at the wall and hoping something stuck.
For sure. For sure.
So I can't really think of anything in terms of a teaching, that stuck with me in terms of youth group. It was really more about the connections and the relationships that we were developing and building during that time period.
The story about your friends is interesting to me, because sometimes I think, like, what is being a Christian other than just like not being a jerk? Like I know that's more, I understand it's way, 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 way more than that. And there are lots of people who are not Christians and also not jerks. But like in that context, my son's not quite there yet, but like teenagers are just jerks to each other, and whether they are friends or not, like that's part of it. And, even people who are close might take a situation like that and use it to their advantage to make other people laugh at your expense. Like, oh, Chris and I are close, he won't care, kind of thing. But to have that sort of like, what, I understand that these things are important to not talk about, or the trust is also important, kind of thing. Like, that's a little bit of a higher level, I think all of our youth leaders are wanting us to get to in high school. Just kind of like rise above some of that petty, whether it's the humor or the competitiveness within friendship, kind of thing. Yeah, it's just like sometimes the easiest thing to do as a Christian is just like, hey, be respectful and like kind of be proactively nice about some stuff that other.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is to the testament of David, our youth pastor, and just instilling that in us. But don't get me wrong, they ragged me pretty hard about it on that trip. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
It wasn't like, oh, that's not offend Chris. They definitely gave me a hard time about it, and for years after. But but yeah, it's like you said, it was just, I guess we just respected each other enough, at least like the core guys in the group.
Mm-hmm.
There was just a level of respect there for some reason that we just bonded,
mm-hmm.
and it worked for us.
Yeah, they understood the trust tree, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
They were operating on that. Overall, just and we've talked about the social aspects of things, and you jumped around a lot to different groups, but what overall do you love about that time in your life, about that youth group experience that you had?
I think what I love the most about it is the fact that I don't have these horrible memories or this trauma, or, that a lot of people associate with it. I came out of it really a different person than when I started. And that's not to say that I was perfect by any means, because I was not. Most of my spiritual growth in terms of like things dawning on me that this is this is probably more what I believe happened, in college or later. But just the fact that I built lifelong friendships, and those, three of those guys in particular, I still could call or talk to in an instant. If I called them right now, they would answer the phone, and if I needed anything, they'd be there in an instant. And so I think what I take the most from it was relationships. I think if I didn't have that youth group, I probably would have been one of those kind of faker kind of Christians, walking around that wasn't trying to establish any kind of relationship with Christ in my life. And like, again, that goes back to that youth pastor who kind of drilled that into us, that it's not, don't be like these other kids at your school. And you can actually have a faith in Christ outside of these four walls. And I think that is really kind of what I took out of it, so to speak.
Yep, absolutely. That's well, speaking of a teaching, that is kind of the I remember that very clearly. Like, once you leave this building, farmhouse, wherever you're at, like, it doesn't stop here, right? And they were very. I think that was a calling card of 90s evangelicalism, is like, hey, try and do this not just here, not just on Sunday mornings, but in every single part of your life.
Yeah. It always kind of breaks my heart, like when I hear people talk about their trauma or their church hurt, and even though I know church hurt is very real, I've experienced it more as an adult than I ever did as a teenager. And so it's definitely a thing. I don't deny it, but it breaks my heart to hear people that didn't have the kind of youth group experience I did. It was great years of my life. Nowhere do I think it was the highlight or the best years of my life. I'm living the best years of my life as a father and a husband.
Sure.
But they were great years, so to speak. So it just always bums me out a little bit when I hear people talk so negatively about their experience. Because I was like, that was not my experience in the least bit.
Yeah, no one can control where they,
Right.
I mean, I guess you can control where they live, but you live and where you go and that sort of thing.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
not everyone has the benefit of someone like Dave or, other youth pastors that have been brought up on the show. Because there's no, and the church itself, whether they have a organizational structure or not, like, it's just so big. Like, there's no way you can make sure that everyone's doing the same thing and acting accordingly, that sort of stuff. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it does break my heart too, like, because it was good for me, even though things have changed a lot. It's just like, I still look back on it fondly, but man, for some people it didn't. It can be a real struggle.
Yeah, and it triggers them in a lot of things too, and I get that, especially if you did experience a lot of hurt or spiritual manipulation and that kind of stuff, because that stuff did go on. Absolutely, it went on. I was fortunate though that I did not have to experience that. So
yeah, good.
Just later as an adult.
That's right. Saved it.
Yeah.
So let's kind of get to that adult stage.
Sure.
In general, how have things changed for you? Are they generally the same, or are things different? Are you still, as you would say, hardcore? Do you tell your kids I'm a hardcore Christian? Like, how are things for you as a 44-year-old?
Obviously, I'm not as fundamental, as I grew up being. Like, my parents didn't put these deep stipulations on things. I was allowed to go to parties. I was allowed to watch rated R movies, all that kind of stuff. And so I still have that as well. But like, of course, I don't just listen to Christian music anymore. That kind of stuff. I would not judge anybody. I don't personally drink, but I don't judge people who do. Whereas in high school, that would have been like,
Yeah.
They were at a party and they were drinking. So, but a lot of that changed in college. I got a better understanding of what grace is, both in my life and in the grace that's extended to me from Christ. I grew up Arminian, which is the opposite of Calvinism, right? So you grow up believing you can lose your salvation, that people aren't predestined into heaven, and I've loosened my reins on that quite a bit in terms of understanding what those beliefs are, and I'm not so hardcore about it, I guess, is the even though I was a hardcore Christian, not so stringent in those beliefs, so to speak. Of course, I work with a lot of Baptists, and so I get a lot of that theology poured into my life now too. In terms of how I'm shaped and morphed, I still hold on to a lot of those things, but I'm definitely a little looser in terms of my theology and understanding of what those things mean. Mm-hmm. Again, I've become a very big believer in grace and what that means to me as somebody who extends it to other people, but then also what it means, what grace means in my life from a spiritual aspect, and that grace just covers so much, and I'm so grateful for it. And I don't have to be as scared of things in my spiritual life, so to speak, just because, the grace of God, it covers so much. And mm-hmm. so I'm just grateful for it. But a lot of that happened in college. I went to Lee University, which is in Cleveland, Tennessee. It's the Church of God school. Believe it or not, even though I still claimed to be Assembly of God all that time, I went to the Church of God school too, and very liberal fundamental school. So it holds to its traditions, but it's very liberal, when you compare it to other very fundamental schools. And I had a choir director there who really poured into me, taught me what it meant to be a worship leader, what it meant to be a worshiper, taught me what it meant to combine the anointing God has put on your life with the talent He has given you as well, and that they go hand in hand, and the things that you learn in schooling go hand in hand with the calling God has in your life, and that one does not negate the other, and they work in tandem with one another. And so he was very influential to me and just on my spiritual growth, and so I've taken a lot of those things with me. But my father-in-law also has been very influential to me. He's my pastor for 14 years. I started leading worship under him as a worship leader in the church, and where I became involved in ministry in church, which I always swore I would never do. He just really was influential in a spiritual level to me as well. So, I still hold on to a lot of the things from youth group, in terms of things I did do and didn't do, relationships built. But I feel like, of course, obviously, at the age of 44, I should be much more mature than I was at the age of 17 in terms of my spiritual walk. And so, just they were definitely building blocks, but they're definitely at the bottom of those beliefs, in terms of what I am or who I am in Christ now. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that made any sense, if I just rabbit trailed off of everything, but
oh, totally. Absolutely. I mean, I think there's just obviously it was going to be a natural progression. Things rarely stay exactly the same. I think I have to change the question sometimes. I think I have it on the sheet of why do you think things change? Well, okay, everything has changed in some regard, but the question really is like how. And if you've listened to some of the episodes, some people have been like, yep, I'm out. Like, I'm just done. And it could be someone who's had as much church as we have, or the three of us have, their whole life. And they're just get to a point where like, I'm done. Other people, are like, it's more robust. And so the point of these conversations is like, why or how did that happen? Because as you said, what you learned in the 90s is still very much a part of who you are. It's hard to separate that. And a lot of people have that experience. It's very foundational for them.
Right.
So you had mentioned that you did actually end up jumping into youth ministry. And was that something that kind of came about unexpectedly? And how did that kind of play out into who you are now?
Yeah, very much unexpectedly. Let's just say I did it for 3 years and I'm not in it anymore. If that gives you any indication. I was the ripe old age of 40 when we had started going to another church. So long story short is I had been a worship leader at the church that my father-in-law had pastored and started. And then he retired and another guy was the associate pastor, became the pastor. And there was a little bit of a falling out. And we were very hurt, very my wife and I were very hurt in terms of kind of some of the things that happened, some of the things that were said to us. And so we went to another church for a little while, and we were there for about a year, and we were just like, we're just going to sit on the pew and do nothing. You know, we both been involved in church our whole life in different aspects of ministry. You know, she had been on staff for many, over a decade. And I had been on staff for a little while. And it was just like, after the hurt, you just don't want to do anything, right? You just want to sit in the church and you just want to be fed and then walk out the door and not have any commitments. And they were looking for a youth pastor. And for a few weeks, it had been nagging on me. Like, there's something here. I don't know what it is. I did not initially feel like God was calling me to be that youth pastor. And, but there was a nagging kind of consistently about there's something here. I don't know what it is. It's something. And then one day I was listening to a podcast and Carlos Whitaker, he's a worship leader, but he was on this podcast talking about his story. And I mean, it was almost identical, beat by beat, scenario by scenario to my story. And I couldn't believe it. I was at work. I was in the gym at work. I was on the elliptical listening to this thing. And I was like, I had to stop occasionally because I was just like, whoa, what is going on? Like, I mean, his story, obviously to a greater scale because he has a national platform. I did not, you know, but I mean, it was almost identical. And it was just like, he started talking about how it was very obvious when God said, now's the time, I'm moving you back into something and it's going to be completely different. And I was like, oh crap. You know, like it dawned on me. I was like, this is what that nagging was. It was God is saying, I want you here. I want you in this position. And so we approached the pastor and said, you know, I really feel like, you know, this is what God is calling us to be and to do. I'm 40 years old. I shouldn't be a youth pastor at the age of 40. But, you know, they came into the meeting hoping that was what we were going to talk about wanting to take that ministry because they had also been feeling it, you know. And so it was a big old learning curve. So, you know, I had been in music ministry my whole life. And so transitioning over to this to this youth pastor role at the age of 40, trying to connect with 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th graders, I have nothing in common with, you know, and this was in, I was 39 initially when I started. So it was 2019.
Yeah.
And it was a very big change because youth group was not the same. First of all, it's not youth group. I think we talked about this before you started rolling. It's not youth group anymore. It's student ministry, right? And everything is flipped on a dime, right? And like you can't talk to the kids without another adult present. You know, I can't be alone in a room with a girl. Obviously, I don't want to, but I'm just saying, like, you can't because of the world we live in today. You know, you can't take that chance that something is going to be said to somebody else that's going to be misinterpreted in a certain way. You know, I had to use programs on my phone that text everybody, but it was all tracked. You know, because to safeguard. And it wasn't because they didn't trust me. It was because it was to protect the youth leaders and the youth pastor against things that might come about or that might be said. And so it was just completely different to me. You know, it was very foreign. It was very hard. I did not enjoy it, you know, but I knew it was where God had called me. I knew it wasn't going to be for a long time. But, you know, I had to learn how to speak. I had to learn how to talk to these kids on a level that they understood, that they got. You know, it was the church I was at was very much program oriented in terms of like we had to have something every month, some kind of event every month. And, you know, then like a very big event every 3 or 4 months, like huge event, lots of money, lots of, you know, that kind of thing where they invited all their friends and it was just, it was very stressful. And, you know, those relationships with those kids were great, but I'm glad I'm not doing it anymore. I'm glad that the Lord, you know, called me out, moved me into something else. You know, it was a very clear, you're done here, you know, moment for my wife and I. And so we were glad to move on from that, you know, from that role. You know, but it's so different. It's so different, you know, than just getting up and, you know, singing 3, Lord, I lift your name on high, and
Yeah.
give thanks, and then do it. A 15-minute devotional is very different than today, where you have to have a full band, and then I have to have a 30-minute sermon, and then we have to have some kind of game. It was just, and you have to have constant communication with them. And they're on their cell phones all the time, which is something we did not have, right? You called your friends on the house phone, if you wanted to talk to them, right? And so it was.
They're probably texting the other kids that are sitting right next to them.
Yeah, they are. Their heads are down and they're just looking the whole time. And it's like it's very hard to connect. And I don't regret that time especially in terms of relationships. And I could really tell that I was making a difference in terms of their spiritual growth. In terms of the things that they would convey back to me. But it was very difficult, especially for a 40-year-old man at that point. But then, I had to go through COVID with it too.
I was going to say, yeah.
COVID hit like right smack dab in the middle of that second year. And like, how do you pastor kids that you can't see? How do you pastor kids? You have to do youth group via Zoom, and like we did events, like we did, digital scavenger hunts, like where they had to go, like I would give them a list of things and they would have to go take pictures and send them back to me. It was just bonkers, and so it's already hard enough to try and pastor these kids that the age gap is already pretty big on. And then I'm throwing a pandemic right in the middle of it, and so, and then, like how do I measure the growth? And, not just from numbers, but like from a spiritual, how do I measure spiritually how these kids are doing? I don't really know, so it was very difficult, but I don't regret the time, but it was very difficult.
My wife and I talk about that sometimes because our son was not quite youth group age. Well, he's a couple of years away from youth group age over COVID, and we were just like, what are they doing? Because, we were doing church virtually and everything, and we would be, we would have tortilla chips and orange juice for communion, at home, making it work. But they didn't really have the capacity to do like a Sunday school, virtually or anything like that. Yeah. And, that obviously that threw a wrench into everybody's life. But I'm, when you said, digital youth group or, Zoom youth group, what I thought of was like, remember when like Zoom happy hours were like a thing for like 2 months. We're like, oh, this is kind of fun. I never want to do that again ever in my life. Like it's novel. And then it's like, no, this is not the way it's supposed to be. Because especially in that context, people are supposed to be connecting and developing the types of relationships you had yourself.
Yeah.
And that's why it was so difficult.
Yeah. Well, then you also look at it from the standpoint of parenting is very different now than it was in the 90s, right? Like you're about parents, but my parents were very hands off. Like, I don't know if I was raised at all, so to speak, like, like they were very hands off. I did what I wanted to do. They didn't care, where I was, that kind of thing. They shipped me off to youth group and they just trusted that the youth pastor was going to do what they were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now the parents are heavily involved and they want to very much have their fingerprints on everything that these kids have done or are doing. And then you get blamed for things, by parents, and they want to be as involved in it, as the kids. And I don't, my parents probably wouldn't have made it. It's my period.
Hey man, well, good for you for doing it because they clearly needed somebody. And who knows, maybe in 20 years, someone will be making a podcast and be like, man, that Chris guy really stepped up and he made a difference. And that's probably feels like maybe in the short term that didn't happen. But sometimes I think we're using those roles and we don't have any idea of the fruit or the impact we had for years.
Sure. Yeah. Hopefully. I mean, who knows? Even if it was just for a moment, if it was a moment of inspiration for them, then that's fine with me.
Right.
So I don't have to be this guy who had the biggest influence for their life. That's fine as long as I could help them through a situation at one point in their life. Then I'm happy with it. So
yeah. In a similar fashion, like in regards to how youth group has changed, it's like there's a lot of struggle there. Comparatively, do you ever look back on what you did with your three youth groups, for two or three, however many you had, like, and be like, oh, I kind of struggle with that, or that experience doesn't sit well with me anymore?
I don't think so. There may have been instances like I didn't care for the youth pastor at the Abundant Harvest where I was my senior year, which is why I
Mhm.
went back to the church after I graduated. Kind of thing. Um, he just wasn't. He didn't connect with anybody. He was also an older youth pastor, so to speak, kind of
Mhm.
like I was the old guy. But yeah, nothing that I can really think about in terms of gosh, that was a horrible part of my life, or that I did not like that, or that was
Mhm.
not, church was just such a part of my life growing up. I mean, we were
Yeah.
there 3 or 4 times a week, and twice on Sunday, and it was just a part of my identity, and so it's hard to see where church is now compared to what it was then, because I want what it was then, and no churches are like that now,
Yeah.
so that's maybe that was the bad thing. Maybe now my expectations are too high because of what I had then.
They set the
But
bar high. Sure.
yeah, and I can't think of anything that I could just go back and well, oh man, that was just really bad. I really regret that part of my life because
Mhm.
I don't. I look back on those years fondly.
Good. That's good.
Yeah.
You're one of a few people who mentioned going twice on Sunday. Like that seems also to be a Southern thing, as you would go Sunday morning, Sunday night,
Yeah,
and
listen, Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night.
yeah,
My mom did a prayer meeting twice a month on Thursday nights that I would go to that as well because, I mean, why not? But then
sure.
we were also in the choir. My sister, my dad, and I were all in the choir, and that we had choir rehearsal on Wednesday night after church, and then Sunday afternoon before Sunday evening church we had choir rehearsal as well. So I mean, I was there a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was. I was there a lot.
You were
And
hardcore, man.
I was
You
hardcore.
already hardcore. That's
That's the only way to put it.
that's exactly right. Perfect word.
Yeah.
Perfect word. Um, what would if you were to have a conversation with your younger self, vice versa, like what would those two people say to each other? Like you've said, you change in terms of maybe judging people and understanding grace more as you've grown older. Like what advice would you give to yourself as you were going through those stages, and what do you think you'd say to yourself now?
So if 18-year-old Chris met 44-year-old Chris, I don't think honestly I would be like, okay, this is probably exactly what I thought my life would turn out to be. I would get married. I would, you're kind of doing exactly, other than maybe your profession, you're
Sure.
doing exactly kind of what I expected your life to be. Like how did you get so old? What's it like being old? That kind of thing. But in terms of like what I would tell my 18-year-old self, don't be so legalistic. Relax a little bit on some things. There was some great music in the '90s you probably would have really enjoyed. Enjoy life a bit more,
Sure.
and that really look forward to fatherhood because it will wreck you in all the best ways.
Yeah.
And so hold on to that dream because it will come to pass and you'll really love it. But yeah, just probably relax a little bit. Just relax.
Yeah. Don't
Like
be so hardcore.
yeah, don't be so hardcore that you can't just relax. Don't judge those guys because they listen to Green Day. It's
Yeah.
all right. It's
Yeah,
okay.
they'll be fine. They'll be
Yeah,
just
they're gonna
fine.
be fine.
Caleb introduced me to Green Day, so it was him. He led me down the path.
That was a bad influence, that's for
It's
sure.
definitely a
Listen, during
bad
the
influence.
'90s, they were it, man. So
Well, they're coming to Minnesota in the summer. I'm thinking about going, so
I am not thinking about going. I am not.
no?
No way. I'm not seeing them in a stadium.
Yeah.
This is totally
It's,
derailing the conversation. No way. I'm not paying $100 to sit 40 miles from them.
listen, my wife and I are on the same, but like when we were dating and in our 20s, like we would go to all kinds of shows,
mm,
but now we are like, I have zero desire to go to an arena, to go
Yeah.
to, anywhere and see anybody play.
Yeah.
I'm good.
it's so expensive.
Yeah.
Like I love Pearl Jam when they came through. I was just like, do I want to pay like almost $200 to
Yeah.
like sit kind of all the way towards the back. Like that is a lot of money. I'll go see a couple bands I like and pay $50, but it's an industry now.
Yeah. I have one arena show left in me, and that's the Killers. But the last couple times they've come through and they're playing like outdoor places, and I'm like, I'm not doing the outdoor thing. I refuse. It's like, no, it's just, I need something that's semi-contained so the sound is semi under control.
Yeah.
So that's my one arena show I got left in me, and even that I don't know.
Yeah, we would go to something at the Ryman or the Grand Ole Opry here, and because they're not super huge, but in terms of, I live in Nashville. Sorry, for those who are listening. But I mean, it would still have to be the right show for me.
Yeah,
sure.
You know.
I'm going to bring this back a little bit to you. No, that's totally cool. You being a 40-year-old youth pastor, doing things that maybe 40-year-olds shouldn't do. If we were youth pastors now, would you be at all excited to do like the music festival thing? Like, would you have the energy to go do? We had Sunshine out here, which is a 3-day festival. I don't know if I could do it, man. I just don't know. There's a lot.
Yeah, I never got to go to any festivals. I did go to a couple Passions in Memphis.
Oh, sure.
And those were crazy because they were the kind of the first ones were those Passion conferences. I got to see Crowder, David Crowder Band and Watermark and Matt Redman and Chris Tomlin back before they were the huge names they became. And but I never got to go to a lot of those festivals. I worked in the music industry for a little while in my 20s, and I went to quite a few GMA weeks and Dove Awards, and I can't imagine doing that stuff now. I don't have the energy for it. A lot of walking, a lot of schmoozing, and putting on a face for people that I just don't have the desire to do anymore, So, yeah.
That stage is over.
Yes, very much.
Caleb, I don't know if I could do it, man. I mean, we crushed those festivals. They were hot. They were muggy. The tents were poor ground. It was bad.
Yeah, I don't know if I could sleep in a tent. I mean, I've got my sleeping problems are pretty well known to people who know me. So I have sleeping problems as is. So like, I don't know if I could sleep in a tent at all. Cause like when we go camping, we have a camper that we use, and I just don't know if I could do it for that. And I mean, real honestly, this is going to sound so snobby. If it was the 90s bands, maybe I could endure it. Maybe I could push through. But if you're going to take the current mainstream scene and that's going to be the bands, there's no way I'm doing it. I mean, there's just no way I'm pushing myself through to see this iteration of the Newsboys. It's just not going to happen, or whatever they end up being, So I think that's the thing for me is like, nope, I couldn't do it with the current set of bands.
Is there really even a Christian rock scene anymore?
There isn't. It'd be a praise and worship weekend. I mean, it's not my thing.
I saw Kelsey McGinnis I don't know if you follow her at all, but she's a writer for Christianity Today. She's writing an article on like what the future of Christian rock is, and it was just like there is no Christian rock scene anymore. It's just like they just do their thing. There's bands that do their thing now, and they're not under a Christian label or that kind of thing. You just got to find them.
It's harder to find
lyrics, that kind of thing. There is just there is no CCM anymore. It's like it's all just worship music. So, which I'm fine with some of it. So I don't have a problem with some of it, especially being a natural worship leader that I am. I am drawn to some of it, but if I want just like that 90s, music that talked about faith, talked about life. Yeah. It's just not there.
Nope.
It's just not there anymore.
This is a pretty good plug for our 2 shows that we did about Christian Christian music. We did a couple with Eric and Josh. We had Eric and Josh in the second episode with Eric and Josh. Josh goes through a list of like current Christian bands that you can find. And he's right. There are some out there.
Yeah.
It just, for me, you got to look so much harder, and it's a lot more hit or miss for me, and it's really genre specific. Anyway, there's a whole other conversation. We'll have to talk music again at some point.
Yeah, Chris and I can come on your music show.
Yeah,
he's scheduled for something.
Nice.
That's why I rely so much on that CCM Twitter scene. Is just because to find new names. It's because I don't know where to look. I don't use Spotify, so I don't get that algorithm going for me or anything. I'm an Apple Music guy, so I just have to find it, So
Yeah. Yeah.
again, not to derail the conversation.
Well,
Look,
Scott
this
did it
is
with the festival. It got me thinking about
I'm
could I do it
sorry.
again?
I'm sorry. No,
That's a
I
good
the
question.
music was,
That should become
but
a standard question. Could you go to a music festival today and survive?
no. That's the answer. I cannot. I cannot. Well, Chris, thanks for staying with us, up with
Yeah.
us here tonight. I know it's getting kind of late where you are. Just a couple last questions. Like overall, how did 90s youth group contribute to the person you are today?
Um, Probably just like I said before, the it was the building blocks of my faith. So you learn kind of the basic fundamentals of what it means to be a Christ follower in a world that doesn't follow Christ, that says they follow Christ in particular. Where I was from, they all said they did, but again, the fruits weren't there, so to speak. And so it just they were the building blocks of this is how you live out your faith, and just go be who you are in Christ. Don't worry about changing others. Just be who you are in Christ, and then let Him do the work from there. And I feel that was probably what really the course that my life has been on, was because that was what I was taught in that youth group.
Nice. That's a great answer. Great answer. We always end our episodes with the question of, do you have any crazy stories of games? You may not, and it's perfectly fine if you don't, because some people could not identify anything. But anything that was like, we talked about things that can't be done now, like things maybe that shouldn't have been done back then, but were, in terms of just like keeping kids interested, game wise, activity wise, that sort of thing.
We didn't do a ton of games. That's the thing, is like my youth group didn't do a ton of games. It was really weird. I went horseback riding one time, and the horse kind of took off with me on it. Like went down into a ravine and started eating some hedges that were down there, and then took off again. I was like, I'm never getting on another horse after that. But that wasn't really a game. When I was at Abundant Harvest, we had two people stood up there and drank as much of a soda, a 2-liter soda, as they could in like whatever amount of time, and whoever had the biggest burp won. And so I chugged this 2-liter thing, and I mean, I was the biggest burp I've ever had in my entire life. Nice. But that was probably the craziest thing. But
burping
now when
Jesus. Sure.
Yeah, for Jesus, right? Burping for Jesus. Now, when I was at the church that I had started going to, where I met my wife, and that kind of thing. Of course, I was fresh out of college. They had an event that they did. So this was about 2003. So things could still be a little wild, around that time. They had where you would take a spoonful of cinnamon and give it to the kid. And, I thought this kid was going to go to the ER. He was coughing so much. I was like, they can never do this again. They had to just down a spoon full of cinnamon. That was crazy, because it's hot. It's hot once you get that much cinnamon going. So
it's hot, and it's not soluble. It doesn't dissolve.
It's just like a big mouth full of just this stuff. Yeah.
Yep. That's why it's like doing like TikTok things before TikTok was around, those trends. Right. And then you realize, like, actually that's super dangerous. Like, don't do that. Funny.
But that, like I said, we weren't game oriented, so I don't really have anything like that. Just,
Sure.
Just don't have a bathroom incident on a youth trip. That's my big recommendation.
And
I like the idea that we lost kid via horse.
Yes.
We came back with one less kid. Just rode off into the sunset.
Listen,
see you later.
I got off that sucker as fast as I could, and I walked it back. I was like, I'm done.
Right.
I'm not doing this horse anymore.
I don't care how far of a walk this is.
Right.
I am walking you back.
Yep.
Halfway through, you're like, man, this would be super fast if I could ride this horse back, but I can't. Yeah, this is something I'm learning, Caleb, is like, not all youth groups are game oriented or just had to be crazy, excuse me. They just weren't. And, so a lot were, obviously. We've talked to plenty of people who were, but that's what I thought we'd find, is like same stories, same amount of craziness, all that sort of thing. But we're learning that just wasn't the case, and it still worked well.
Yeah. I think a lot of this cultural, like you guys being from Minnesota, you didn't have the whole culture of it all, of church's life, right? So they didn't have to do games or these crazy events to get kids there because their parents were already bringing them there, right? Mm-hmm. So the culture said, we don't have to do these crazy things because I'm already going to have a room full of students because their parents drug them there. Whereas you guys, you probably had to do a little more pulling to bring them into the youth group.
Yeah.
Yeah. I almost wonder too if some of it's even just churches like how established they were.
Sure.
Like, our youth group when we started going wasn't very established. So there's this like, well, we really got to gamify it up to bring in kids, or if you get more established churches, so it probably can even change within areas, because there probably were some Bible Belt churches that were a little more crazy. And I just wonder if even like one of the things Eric talked about was like, it wasn't that the organized games were there, but they were there so much that it was like we were playing. He talked about playing like ball in the sanctuary, and like,
oh yeah.
So that's that's a different cultural experience probably for some churches,
Yeah, we did lock-ins, and like we would play hide and go seek, flashlight hide and go seek, and we'd be hiding in the sanctuary and in the in the choir loft, in the baptistry, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. With only 2 adults, for all these kids. So
back in the day.
Back in the day.
Well, hey man, thanks for talking about back in the day with us and talking about your experience growing up in the 90s. A lot of similarities, and it's been cool to chat with you a little bit, get to know you more, and really appreciate you coming on and sharing all this with us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. It's like I told you guys, like, anytime you need a guest, I was there. I lived it through it, like it's a big part of my life. And again, I don't have any regrets about it. And it was a great part of my life. So I'm always excited to talk about it, and I reach out to 3 of those guys all the time, and my life is better for it. So
yeah. That's kind of also something I've heard a lot, Caleb and I obviously, talking still all this time, you too, with all your friends. I mean, a lot of people have those long-lasting relationships that were built there. So
yeah.
Well, hey, thanks again. Really appreciate the storytelling, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Sounds good.
Thanks for listening to this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. We hope you enjoyed it. Once again, we want to say thanks to Chris for coming on the show and talking with us about kind of his story and where he was at and just sharing that youth group experience. Again, it's great to hear about kind of the variety of youth group experiences from people all over the country, all over the United States, potentially all over the world. Well, we could go global at some point. But thanks, Chris, for coming on and your transparency and just talking about your experience and kind of where you're at now and how that youth group experience has impacted your life. It was great to hear. Let us know what you thought of this show or any of our other shows. You can find us on Twitter at the handle @SurviveYG. You can also email the show at isurvivedyouthgroup@gmail.com. Again, isurvivedyouthgroup@gmail.com. And why would you email the show? Well, you can email the show if you're interested in being on the show. If you want to join us to talk about your youth group experience. I know the show started as something centered around the youth group experience that Scott and I had, and we were trying to really focus on kids that we had gone to church with and gone to youth group with, or kids who had maybe followed us shortly after. But we've expanded outside of that, obviously, and that's what we're looking for. We're really trying to continue to expand this to hear a huge variety of stories about youth group and kind of how that youth group experience has impacted your life. Again, whether you're still at the church you were raised at or you've left the faith entirely, we want to hear your story and how that youth group experience has impacted your life. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating or review. If you enjoy this show, you might also enjoy the other podcast I do. It's a music podcast called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Every week, well, not every week, but weekly, almost weekly, I have somebody on the show to talk about an album they love, an album they appreciate, and that's what we do. We sit down and we talk about it, and we kind of try and answer 5 simple questions. So again, it's called the Album Anniversary Podcast. The music at the beginning and the end of this show is the instrumental version of the song Positive Charge by the Air Private Roberts. Thanks again, and we will talk to you soon.